Hi, video here to describe to you what's going to happen with the results of your mock exams and what we're going to do with them in terms of coming up with grades. And that's like a mock exam grade, predicted grades, and also I'll talk a little bit about the situation as we understand it with teacher assessed grades. So, something we will not try to do is calculate what grade would you get right now if you did your GCSE right now. In other words, a mock exam grade. But what we will do instead is calculate a predicted grade for you. And the reason we're not going to try and say, well, this if you did the exam now, if this mock exam was your real exam, what grade would you get? Is that from experience, most students do better in the summer anyway because they've done more revision themselves and their teachers have given them more support in preparing for those exams. And therefore, you get told a grade that's lower than the one we think you're likely to get, and that does not tend to motivate many people. In fact, it demoralises some. Also, the grades that are going to be awarded to your year group this year, they're going to be, at a national level, they're going to be more generous than they were prior to COVID existing. From 2019, which was that last year, to 2021, the grades nationally did inflate, but the grades aren't going to be brought back down to the 2019 level this year. At a national level, they're going to be brought halfway back down. So whilst the grades won't be as generous as were given nationally last year, they'll be more generous than were awarded prior to the pandemic. Also, grade boundaries, if we gave you a paper from a previous year and we just simply used the grade boundaries from that year, those grade boundaries were formed from the results of students who had had no disruption to their education. And therefore, for those sort of two reasons, if we did use grade boundaries from previous years and applied them to a mock paper, they would be too harsh, most likely. And therefore, they would most likely say you're actually achieving a lower grade than you really are, which would be further, sort of demoralise you further, I guess. So therefore, we're not going to do that. What we will do is calculate a predicted grade because we think that's a fairer thing to do. Because we can take into account how you did, how other students did, how students in the past in this school have done, and all of those things put together allow us to be more confident about saying this is the grade that we predict you are going to get. And as I'll talk about in a moment, it's going to be a range of grades. It's going to be 2 grades rather than a single grade because that sort of gives you a better understanding of the level of certainty we have about what you might do in the summer, because clearly it's not a certain thing. So as I've said, we're going to calculate this predicted grade. It's going to be a range of 2 grades, and in doing so, we will consider your mock results. They're one of the primary bits of evidence we'll use. But also we will take into account we've recorded any periods of isolation you've had. So if you've missed 10 days of school, then we know the dates of the days you've missed, we know your attendance, and that has been communicated to each of the subjects as part of this process. They'll look at what you did, what we predicted in summer last year. Those predictions were very difficult to make in summer last year because of the nature of the education you'd had immediately prior to that and the amount of varying levels of disruption that different people had had. But we will look back at what we predicted last year just sort of as a little check to see is what we're saying now really out of line with that. And that part of the process is being done without any knowledge of who the work belongs to. You'll know that you only put your candidate numbers on the scripts, and all of this has been done anonymously. So there's no prejudice against you. There's nothing about what your teacher thinks. I know lots of people think, well, that teacher doesn't like me, therefore they're going to predict a low grade. At this point in the process, and the process goes on afterwards, as I'll say, but at this point in the process, everything has been done anonymously. And once that's been done, it then seems only fair that your class teachers are allowed to review the grade that you're going to be predicted with knowledge of who you are. So they get a list of names of people in their class, they can see what the grades predicted for them are, and if there are any that just don't seem right, that anonymous part of the process hasn't got quite right, the grade for the student, then they'll raise that with their subject lead and they'll have a discussion as to whether or not the grade needs to be altered. Now, the reason it's going to be a range of 2 grades is simply because this isn't a very certain process. If I was to predict a grade now for any student I taught, I don't know how well they're going to work in school for the next 6 months. I also don't know to what degree are they going to prepare for their mocks with revision. I also don't know how they're going to cope with the material that I've got left to teach in class and how my lessons are going to benefit them and allow them to answer questions which at the moment they struggle with, may well be able to answer them better in the summer. So it's a really uncertain process. And personally, if I was to predict a grade for everyone I taught, then I might anticipate I'd get about half of them right, half of them wrong. Probably about half I'd get right, a quarter or so I might sort of under-predict by a grade, and a quarter I might over-predict by a grade. So it really isn't a certain process. And if we were to say this single grade is the thing that we think you're going to get, the grade we think you're going to get, then that would suggest we are quite certain. So I think it would be perhaps a little misleading. So you're going to get 2 grades, and the example I've chosen is a 7-6 or a 6-7. So if you were to be predicted a 7/6, or if you were to be predicted a 6/7, then we think most likely you're going to get a grade 6 or 7. That's the level of confidence we have. I suppose it's slightly nuanced in that a 7/6 perhaps feels that the 7 is a little more likely, and the 6/7 perhaps a little more likely. That means a 6 is a little more likely. So there's a slight difference in the order that the numbers appear, but both of them do mean that we think you're likely to get one of those 2 grades. If you're faced with a situation where you've got to fill in an application form to a college or something like that, and they require a single grade, then go with the first one. So if you were told 7/6, put down a 7. If on your report it says 6/7, put a 6. But as I said, both of them we feel are the grade that you're likely to get. Now, teacher assessed grades. We haven't got a great deal more certainty about this yet. All of the things that were suggested to us that might happen by the government are still intended to happen. The exams, we're still working with the view that exams will take place in the summer. So at the moment, there are no teacher assessed grades, and there is no process that's been published for calculating teacher assessed grades. However, we've carried out your mocks in a way that means, should we need evidence for teacher assessed grades, we can use those mock exams. But as I said, we haven't yet been told that teacher assessed grades are going to be required. In fact, the opposite. We've been told that exams will still go ahead. We're going to take the same approach for your next round of mocks in March, which means that should later in the year exams be cancelled, teacher assessed grades will be required. We have both sets of mock exams to use as evidence, as we have been advised to do by the government to prepare for the fact that perhaps exams could be cancelled at the last minute. The reason that we've not been able to return your original papers to you is that we have to keep all of those papers as evidence, and we have been advised in the regulations for contingency planning, and we have been told not to return the original scripts so that they cannot be tampered with in any way, and that they are reliable evidence should we need it for teacher assessed grades. So, because the process for teacher assessed grades, should it happen, has not been published yet, I can absolutely say to you that the predicted grades we calculate now, they're not your teacher assessed grades. They are simply our prediction of what you might achieve next summer. So, to summarise all of that, maybe I've whittled on a little, exams should still be taking place. The grades on your report are not teacher assessed grades, they're predicted grades. They're our best guess, if you like, of where you might end up next summer when exams take place. Should teacher assessed grades be required, we've started to collect the evidence that we will need in order to support those teacher assessed grades. But should teacher assessed grades be calculated, they may be different to the predicted grades that we've got now. They could be higher, if you start to perform a lot better. They could be lower if we've over-predicted at this moment. So, as I say, there's a degree of uncertainty, but hopefully none of this will be relevant because the exams will go ahead next summer as intended.